The title for tonight's program is Back from the Brink, How Grassroots Activists Can Prevent Nuclear War. And we are delighted to have Dr. Ira Helfand as our speaker this evening. Dr. Helfand is a member of the steering group of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN for short, which is the recipient of the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize.
Thanks, Michaela, and thanks everyone for coming out tonight and listening to what I have to say. We're in an extremely difficult moment right now where there is a tremendous denial on the part not only of the general population, but I think even of peace activists like ourselves about the severity of the crisis that we're facing. We used to think back in the 1980s that nuclear war was a real threat, something we need to worry about. And as a result of that, millions of people got politically active, demanding an end to the Cold War arms race. And we were actually very successful, much against our expectations. We got the United States and the Soviet Union to stop building more nuclear weapons, to declare that nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought, and to begin the process of dismantling the arsenals that they had built. But when the Cold War ended, we all, understandably, there's this palpable wave of relief that you could feel across the whole planet that we had gotten through the Cold War, we dodged the bullet, we hadn't had a nuclear war. And we all began to forget about the fact that thousands of nuclear warheads were still lying around, waiting for a bad time to put them back into the center of human events. That bad moment has arrived in spades over the last several years. And the Russian invasion of Ukraine last February, I think was just the final step in revealing to us how dangerous the current situation has become. Clearly, that invasion and the flood of nuclear threats that Putin has unleashed since the invasion have made it almost impossible in a kind of abstract intellectual way to continue to deny that nuclear weapons are a real and present danger. On an emotional level, we're still denying it. We're still all going about our business as though this were not happening, but it is. We have a situation where one of the two great nuclear powers has launched a war of aggression against its neighbor, threatening to use nuclear weapons as a shield to defend that military intervention, to try to keep people from coming to the assistance of Ukraine. And it has brought us closer to nuclear war than we had probably ever been. But it's not the only factor. Even before the invasion of Ukraine, relations between the United States and Russia were terrible, the worst they'd been since the end of the Cold War. Relations between the United States and China are worse than they've been at any point since the 1970s. We have to understand that we are also headed on a collision course with another major nuclear power in the relations between the United States and China. And clearly the dispute over what should happen to Taiwan could easily become a flashpoint for a nuclear war between the two largest economies in the world. In addition to that, the situation on the Korean Peninsula is as dangerous as it has ever been. There have been a large increase in missile tests over the last few months. There have been reports that the North Koreans are preparing another nuclear test. Whatever the exact details of what they are doing, this is clearly a very volatile and dangerous situation. And then there's South Asia, which is the area that I worry about the most, and it gets the least attention here in the United States. But India and Pakistan have gone to war 4 times. They almost went to war again twice in 2019, just 4 years ago. And if they go to war again, it is almost certain that this war will escalate to the use of nuclear weapons with catastrophic effects in South Asia, but also across the planet, as I'll talk about in a few minutes. In addition to these 4 sort of geopolitical flashpoints, there are 2 other factors which are dramatically increasing the danger of nuclear war. The first is the advance in cyber technology, and particularly the increase in the threat, therefore, of cyber terrorism. We used to worry primarily that a terrorist group might get hold of one nuclear weapon, probably a smallish one, Hiroshima-sized, and use it to attack a city, quite possibly New York, but also, Washington, Moscow, Tel Aviv, Bombay, London. That's still a danger. But the greater threat is that a terrorist group could carry out a cyber attack, hack into the command and control systems of the nuclear arsenals of one or more of the nuclear weapon states, and either directly launch their weapons or create a false alert, convince the country being hacked that it is being attacked with nuclear weapons, and trick it into launching its own arsenal in response to this non-existent nuclear attack. This is an absolute nightmare for the people who are responsible for cybersecurity here in the United States, and I'm sure the other nuclear weapon states as well. US military computer systems get hacked into hundreds of times a day. The offense in cyber terrorism always has the upper hand because the defense never knows what the next attack is going to look like. And it's really only a matter of time until something really bad happens in this realm. In addition, the final factor which I would mention that is driving us towards nuclear war is the climate crisis. And we don't always think of these two great twin existential threats, this relationship between them. But we have to understand all 9 of the nuclear weapon states claim they're going to get rid of their nuclear weapons someday when the world is safer. And the problem is the world isn't getting safer, it's getting more dangerous. And the principal driver of that is climate change. And as the climate crisis progresses over the next couple of decades, which it will, even if we do all the things we're supposed to try to slow it down, large areas of this planet will find it increasingly difficult to support the human population. And that's going to lead to conflict within societies. It's going to lead to migration on a scale we have never seen before. It's going to cause conflict between nations as they fight over increasingly scarce resources, primarily of land and water. And as this conflict unfolds, if nuclear weapons are still on the table, the chance of them getting used is going to grow dramatically. So for all of these reasons, we have to step away from the denial that we are all experiencing and understand that this is something which actually could happen if we don't make very substantial fundamental change in the nuclear policy of the United States and the other countries that have these weapons. I want to talk, since I'm a doctor, and what we mainly do, the doctors in this movement, is to help people understand what the actual medical consequences would be. I want to describe just a little bit what the medical consequences of a nuclear war would be. And what I find is, obviously, most people have an idea that this would be a very terrible thing. But what I always find when I talk to people is that we don't really understand at all how bad it's going to be. And it's important for us to get the full reality. Most of us have seen pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They're terrifying, and they are a very powerful reminder, warning of what nuclear weapons can do. But the important thing for us to understand is that if nuclear weapons are used again, it is not going to be like Hiroshima or Nagasaki. That was, in each case, one relatively small bomb, 15 kilotons at Hiroshima, 22 kilotons at Nagasaki, on one city each. If there's a war between the United States and Russia, it's going to be many bombs on many cities, and most of them are going to be much larger, anywhere from 6 to 50 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. Now, we don't know the exact targeting strategy of either the United States or Russia, but people who I think have a good idea of what that strategy might be are pretty clear that a major city, certainly a very large major city like New York, is probably targeted with anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 and possibly more nuclear warheads. Again, each of which would be 6 to 50 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. I'm not going to go through the full details of what that would look like, but the bottom line is that an attack on New York of that magnitude would create a firestorm that would engulf almost the entire metropolitan area. The firestorm would be something like 32 miles across, covering 800 square miles. And within that entire area, everything flammable would burn. The trees, paper, cloth, plastic, heating oil, gasoline. It would all ignite, and we'd have hundreds of thousands of fires, which would coalesce over the course of about a half an hour into this giant firestorm. Within this entire area, 800 square miles, the temperatures would rise to 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. All of the oxygen would be consumed, and every living thing would die. In the case of New York City, we're talking about some 12 to 15 million people in the metropolitan area who would be killed in a half an hour. And if this were part of a large-scale war between the United States and Russia, this kind of destruction would take place in every major city in both countries. Altogether, perhaps 100 to 200 million people would die in the first afternoon. The entire economic infrastructure of both countries would be destroyed. There'd be no cell phones, no internet, no electric grid, no food distribution system, no public health system. None of the things that we require to sustain ourselves would be available. And in the months after this initial attack, most of the survivors, the people who did not die in the initial wave of bombs, would also succumb to radiation poisoning, to epidemic disease, to starvation. But we have to understand that what I've been talking about so far are just the effects in the countries which fight the war, the United States and Russia. This would be a catastrophe for the rest of the planet as well. The fires that I was talking about would put about 150 million tons of soot into the upper atmosphere, blocking out the sun and dropping temperatures across the entire planet an average of 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Within the interior regions of North America, the temperatures would drop 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. This is like the Ice Age. And under these conditions, all the ecosystems that have evolved since the last Ice Age would collapse, food production would stop, and a study that was released last August showed that 5 to 6 billion people, 3/4 of humanity, would starve to death in the ensuing 2 years. That same study showed that even a very limited nuclear war, as might take place between India and Pakistan, would cause enough climate disruption and enough decline in food production to lead to a global famine that would kill not 5 to 6 billion people, but 2 billion people, including 130 million people here in the United States. And while neither of these scenarios would mean the extinction of our species, either one of them would be the end of civilization as we know it. No society in history has ever withstood a shock of this magnitude, and there is no reason to believe that the complex economic system we all depend on would do any better. So this is the danger that we are facing at this moment. And it is critically important that we understand what I've been talking about is not a nightmare or a science fiction movie. This is the danger we're living with every day that we allow these weapons to continue to exist. And even if no one deliberately decides to start a nuclear war, there is always the possibility of a war by accident. And we know of at least 6 occasions when either Moscow or Washington actually began the process of launching the nuclear arsenal in the mistaken belief that they were under attack by the other side. So it's a pretty grim situation that we're facing. But the good news is this is not the future that needs to be. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature. It is not as though an asteroid is coming at the planet and there's nothing we can do about it. These are little machines that we have built with our own hands. They're about the size of the chairs we're all sitting in. We have dismantled more than 50,000 of them already, and we know how to dismantle the 13,000 that remain. What is missing is the political will. And that's where the Back from the Brink campaign comes in here in the United States. This campaign was launched in the summer of 2017, shortly after the United Nations adopted the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It was our hope that we would capture the enthusiasm and the energy that the adoption of that treaty was generating. But it was also recognized that we needed to adapt our efforts here in the United States to the American political reality, which is that the United States is not going to sign and ratify a treaty requiring it to dismantle its nuclear arsenal if that means unilateral nuclear disarmament. It will only do it if it gets the other nuclear weapon states to join with it in this enterprise. And so what Back from the Brink called for rather, was for the United States to embrace the treaty, to stop opposing it, and to carry out the next step needed to bring the treaty into universal universal entry into force. And that would be to have the United States initiate negotiations with the other 8 nuclear armed states for a verifiable, enforceable, time-bound agreement to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. We also called on the United States to adopt 4 interim measures that would lessen the danger of nuclear war while these negotiations proceeded and would give some momentum to the process. We asked the United States to adopt a no first use policy, to end sole presidential authority, the situation where the president alone, without anybody else having a say, can start a nuclear war, to take the weapons off air trigger alert so they can't be launched by a terrorist attack, and to abandon the plan to spend $1.7 to perhaps $2 trillion enhancing every aspect of the nuclear arsenal. We modeled the campaign on the Freeze campaign of the 1980s. That is to say, we took this prescription of what U.S. nuclear policy ought to be and started bringing it to cities and towns, faith groups, other kinds of non-governmental organizations around the country to get them to endorse it, as similar groups in cities and towns endorsed the Freeze back in the 80s. And at this point, the campaign has really grown very dramatically. There are over 300 NGO-type organizations which have endorsed the campaign, including major environmental groups like the Sierra Club, the NRDC, a number of major national faith communities, the Episcopal Church, the Pax Christi movement within the Catholic Church, the Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church, the Reconstructionist Jewish movement, the Islamic Society of North America, the Unitarian Church, the Congregational Church. We've gotten many local organizations to endorse it as well. And actually, if Brooklyn for Peace hasn't formally endorsed it, that would be one very simple thing that you all could do to formally join the campaign. And then this year, we've gotten a resolution introduced into Congress, HRES 77, which is serving as sort of a focal point nationally for organizing around this campaign. It was introduced by Congressman Jim McGovern from Massachusetts. It now, as of today, has 14 co-sponsors. We are hoping to get a companion resolution entered into the United States Senate. And perhaps the most effective thing that people can do at this point, because I think will give the most momentum to this campaign, is to get their members of Congress to sign on as co-sponsors of this resolution. We don't expect it to pass, obviously, with a Republican majority in the House, but it is our goal to get, we'd like to see 50 to 60 co-sponsors by the end of this year, which I think would put this whole issue squarely on the table for national political discussion, make it something which is unavoidable in the upcoming presidential campaign, and give us a chance to really engage with the American people in the conversation we need to have to educate people about the danger and to offer them a vehicle, a pathway forward for getting rid of these weapons. So I'm really delighted about the chance to have spoken with you this evening about this campaign, and I would, at the appropriate moment, would be happy to take any questions about what it is that people can do further to try to build support for this nationally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Helfand, for your insights on the current state of the nuclear threat and what nuclear war would actually look like, and on the potential for us to build a real strong movement for nuclear policy reform. I want to introduce 2 wonderful dedicated activists from the Syracuse Peace Council, Hughes and Margrit Diehl, to talk a little about their success in building Back from the Brink in Syracuse. So Margaret and Don, I will pass it to you.
I'm going to go first, and then Margaret will join in. Both of us are on the Nuclear Free World Committee, which is part of the Syracuse Peace Council. And we have a little slideshow. Can you all see it?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay, so the Syracuse Peace Council is Well, it was formed way back in 1936 by Quakers and other folks that were alarmed by the growing threat of war in Europe and Asia. It is the longest continuously active peace organization in the United States. We've been working against nuclear weapons for longer than any of us who are currently alive can remember, so a long time. SPC was organized or is organized into several committees. That's where Michaela used to work. And we focus on specific areas of peace and justice. Ours is the Nuclear Free World Committee, affectionately known as the NFW Committee. We are also affiliated with Peace Action of New York State. So as Ira mentioned, we have been working on getting local groups and local politicians to endorse Back from the Brink. What we do, our method is typically to arrange a meeting on good old Zoom and make a presentation more expanded than what you'll see here.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, we have put together now a really good PowerPoint that's we find very effective. And before the pandemic, we met in person with our legislators and with various groups and gave them a presentation. Then it went to Zoom, which has perhaps enabled more people to participate. But I want to point out that, when we go to our elected officials, they're busy. They say how, we don't vote on this. This is not our issue. And we are very strong in pointing out to them that, first of all, if there is a nuclear war or that we wouldn't be around anymore. The planet would be destroyed, as Dr. Helfand has described. And also all this money, this over $1 trillion that's being spent on upgrading our nuclear arsenal should be used for all the needs that we have locally, with housing. And yes, here is a slide on that, all things. So those are two things that we point out. And we also point out that we are trying to build grassroots support to bring to Congress, to show Congress that people really are concerned about this issue. Done.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to go back to this slide. This shows you a list which is continually growing of local community organizations who we've met with and who have signed on to endorse Back from the Brink. And then on the left-hand side are politicians. Some are statewide. We have New York State senators. We have one woman from the New York State Assembly. And in 2020, we engaged with the mayor of Syracuse, Ben Walsh. And we had just a wonderful meeting with him. We brought on a bunch of representatives from our sponsors, sponsoring organizations. Everyone brought their own perspective on why Back from the Brink is important to support. And by the end of the meeting, he said, yeah, this is a no-brainer. I'll sign on. So this is the event that we had. This is the City Hall in Syracuse. And he is I'm not sure who's at the mic actually, but yes, he is.
That is the mayor.
Approaching the mic. Diane Swords is on the left and Ben Walsh is being introduced. This is August 6th of 2020, the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima.
Right. And the Common Council also signed on. The Syracuse Common Council endorsed.
Correct. And you can see we have a whole variety of displays that talk about
Right.
the horrors of nuclear war. There's the alternative of peace.
Right.
So,
What we also were doing, this one was held at City Hall, and it was a commemoration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But we also, as we go to our state elected officials, we held a rally and press conference. It wasn't quite as elaborate as this, but in front of the state office building. And we also approached the county legislature and did the same thing. And we did a big rally in front of the federal building, actually. And we, in fact, just a few weeks ago, met with the aide of our local congressman, who is a Republican. And we haven't heard back yet. The aide was very receptive, but I have to admit, we're not too hopeful.
but he was receptive.
He was receptive.
So, last I saw from the website, we have 75 municipalities and states that have endorsed back from the brink.